Okay, think about your health for a second, your happiness, your sense of security. What if I told you that all of it, in a way, is connected to the protests you see on the news? Today, we're going to unpack this really powerful and honestly pretty surprising link between big social movements and our own personal well being. And I think it's a connection that might just change how you see the world around you.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll nail down what well-being actually is. Then, we'll look at how social movements really work as these engines for change. We're going to dive deep into hashtag Black Lives Matter as a case study, unpack the super important idea of intersectionality, and then wrap it all up by seeing how protests can actually lead to real, lasting progress.
So let's kick things off. What do we even mean when we talk about well being? The common idea is that it's all up to us. It's our mindset, our choices, our personal responsibility. But the reality? Well, it's a much, much bigger picture than that. When you look at the academic definition, well-being isn't just about feeling happy. It is an incredibly broad concept. It's the state of thriving, really. It covers your physical health, your financial stability, your ability to handle stress, but also something deeper, a sense of meaning, purpose, and dignity in your life. It's really the whole shebang. This right here shows a really crucial idea, this circle of responsibility. You can see how it just ripples outward. Our well-being isn't just our own job. It's this shared duty that starts with us, but extends to our families, to our schools, our jobs, and all the way up to our governments and even international agencies. We're all part of this ecosystem of well-being. And this is a really important distinction to make. Welfare is what we usually think of as the state's job, things like healthcare, education, those social safety nets. But over the last few decades, the conversation has really shifted towards well-being, which is framed as this more psychological, individual thing. And that's not just a change in words, it's a quiet shift of responsibility, moving it away from the state and placing it more and more on our own shoulders. Okay, so if our well-being depends so much on these huge systems, what happens when those systems are actually broken? I mean, how do we fix them? Well, this is exactly where social movements come into play. So what even is a social movement? It's not like a company with a CEO and a formal hierarchy. It's more of a spontaneous, grassroots network, a bunch of people coming together around a shared goal. And their real power comes from this loose, decentralized structure, which lets them adapt and mobilize and demand some pretty fundamental changes to the way things are. And this chart is brilliant because it shows that not all movements are the same. This framework from way back in 1966 breaks them down based on who they're trying to change, individuals or society, and how much change they want. Now, for our purposes today, we are zooming in on this one, reformative movements. Think hashtag #MeToo or hashtag Black Lives Matter. They aren't trying to tear down the whole system, but to reform specific parts of it, specific institutions that are causing harm. All right, now for a really powerful, real-world example that's going to tie all of this together. The hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. Let's take a look at how it directly connects the act of protesting to very real things like health, economics, and overall well-being. What started as a hashtag protesting police violence absolutely exploded into a global movement. Its core mission is to shine a massive spotlight on systemic racism, the kind that isn't just about individual attitudes, but is actually baked into the rules and procedures of our institutions, everything from policing and healthcare to hiring practices. The COVID-19 pandemic made this connection tragically, undeniably clear. Look at this number, 1/3. It's just staggering. That's the proportion of people hospitalized with COVID-19 in the US who are African American, even though they make up a much smaller slice of the population. See, this isn't just a health statistic. It is a direct outcome of those systemic inequalities in things like housing, employment, and access to healthcare. This movement also forced a massive conversation, both nationally and globally. And as the source material we're looking at points out, the emergence of oppositional slogans like hashtag All Lives Matter was framed by researchers as a kind of resistance, as a denial of the very specific systemic problems that the movement was trying to bring to light. Okay, so let's use the hashtag BLM movement as a springboard to understand another really critical concept for any social movement, and that's intersectionality. It is the key to understanding how movements build these incredible coalitions, but also why, sometimes, they can fracture from the inside. So the core idea here, which was coined by the scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, is that our identities aren't single-lane roads. They're more like complex intersections. You just can't understand someone's experience by only looking at their race, or only their gender, or only their class. They all intersect and overlap. For example, the experience of a Black woman is uniquely shaped by both racism and sexism, and you have to look at how those forces collide. And this whole concept is kind of a double-edged sword. On one side, it's a movement's greatest strength. When you see feminist, LGBTI+, and anti-racist movements all showing up for each other, their collective power just grows enormously. But on the other side, it can reveal some really deep divisions. The source material notes tensions where movements can end up marginalizing certain groups within their own ranks, like some of the conflicts within feminism over trans rights, or the observation that the #MeToo movement, despite being started by a woman of color, ended up primarily benefiting white women. Okay, for our final section, let's zoom all the way back out. How does the raw emotional energy of a protest on the street actually get translated into real, lasting change that you can see and feel in your everyday life? How does that happen? This slide shows the ideal path, what the source calls a virtuous spiral, which is basically a positive feedback loop for progress. So it starts with a problem, right? Like discrimination, which sparks a movement. That movement then campaigns for very specific changes. And when it succeeds, it creates new laws and social norms that improve well-being, which in turn strengthens the foundation for even more progress down the line. But here's the absolute key. For that change to actually stick, it can't just be about changing hearts and minds. The ultimate goal is to take all that energy from the movement and embed it right into the fabric of society. And that means new laws, new policies in our workplaces, fundamental changes to how big institutions operate, and a recognized public duty for those institutions to keep reforming themselves. And this quote from the source material, man, it just sums up the main point of this entire explainer perfectly. Basically, real progress in human rights and well-being almost never happens because organizations just voluntarily decide to be better. It happens because social movements create the pressure, the demand, and the impetus for that change. They literally push society forward. So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. In a world with a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, where does the real power to create a better, healthier, and more just future actually lie? Is it still with our existing institutions, or is it with the collective power of ordinary people coming together to demand something better? What do you think?